Sound? Hello, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I can hear myself. So, what does a guy that studies ancient civilizations and rocks have to do with breakthrough energy and new energy and free energy? Everything. Because it seems that we're finding more interesting answers to the questions of new energy and breakthrough energy and free energy from the distant past than what we're finding today. And this is what I'm going to be unveiling today, because this is incredible breakthrough information that needs to be shared with everyone. And I believe we're sitting right on the edge of truly giving the world a deep understanding of free energy by exploring the past. But unfortunately, we remain a species with amnesia. And this is a big problem for us. We have no idea who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. And in this deep state of amnesia, we forget that we can look at the past to learn about what we should be doing about the future. And this is really what I'm going to try and do here, is to connect the dots, to see what we can learn from ancient civilizations that can benefit us not only today, but into forming the kind of utopian future that we all believe we should have as living, breathing human beings, and not pieces of paper. Nikola Tesla, I believe, actually used did a lot more with sound than most of us would realize. And one of his most ignored statements is that the earth rings like a bell, and if you tap into the sound frequency of the earth, you've got an inexhaustible source of energy. And I really believe that that's probably what he was using more than anything else, using sound of Gaia to generate the unlimited free energy that he seemed to have shared with us. And what does this have to do with ancient civilizations and our evolution of consciousness? Everything, because it's now very clear that the ancient cultures used sound and resonance and frequency to do everything they did. The spectacular structures that they built around the world, and all the mystery they left for us to unravel, we're starting to unravel it because we're starting to understand that it was sound. Ed Leeds Collin in southern Florida built Coral Castle. I believe used sound to levitate these things. And the reason I say this is because he did this incredible thing on his own, moving these giant blocks, carving them, moving them around, and building this whole place called Coral Castle on his own. And apparently he did this with what some schoolboys could refer to as ice cream cones in his hands. And this is why I call it the ice cream cone phenomenon. And I got very excited about this, and these are the little moments in your research, in your life of research, that change the way you think about things and how you see things, because I've been finding ice cream or cone-shaped tools around South Africa, around the stone circles, since the first day I set my foot there, and I found dozens and dozens of them, all connected to the stone circles and the ancient ruins that I've been exploring. And suddenly you start finding these cone-shaped tools in Egypt. You start finding them everywhere. You find them in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose in California. And guess what the cuneiform inscriptions on these cone-shaped tools tell us? That these were tools utilized for building the temples in Sumer. And they commemorate the building of the temples in Sumer. Cone-shaped tools. And we start getting an interesting common denominator. And how old is Adam's calendar? Well, I found this interesting translation in one of Sitchin's works that pretty much describes Adam's calendar almost. I've nearly fell on my back when I found this. It says, 40 Shah after arriving on Earth, Enki built a special place of observing in the deep Abzu on the edge of a cliff, aligned with his abode in the north and the peaks. It's like, you got to be kidding me. It's like, I read this over and over again. I couldn't believe it. I could find something like this. And when you do the numbers, based on what Sitchin gave us, it makes Adam's calendar, or Enki's calendar, about 285,000 years old. And if that's where humanity apparently was created, guess what? The numbers still fit, based on the mitochondrial Eve theory, isn't it? Or study. So what are these stone circles for? And I think you've already figured this out for yourselves, because you're a smart bunch of people at an energy conference, right? And you can see that these stone circles, all of them resemble cymatic patterns, cymatic shapes. And that's exactly what they are. They're just cymatic patterns representing the sound frequency in the earth at that specific place. In other words, each stone circle is an energetic plug point into the earth, sucking out the energy through sound at that particular space. Are they all connected, making one huge giant energy grid? And the magnetron plays an important role here. Magnetron is a device we use extensively today in modern technology. And laser laser beams created by magnetrons can cut metal in a split second. So magnetrons are incredibly powerful things. So you can imagine how powerful a magnetron of about 20 meters in diameter is. When I discussed this with Kevin Orlovsky yesterday, and I shared this with him, he nearly freaked out. I said to him, I think that one of these could create more energy than all the power plants on Earth today. And he just shook his head and said, yeah, I believe it would. So I believe that we're dealing with advanced knowledge of the understanding of the laws of nature and using sound as the source of energy. I'm going to come back to this. So we're looking at one giant energy grid, creating huge amounts of energy, all connected, all for the mining of gold and whatever else we haven't figured out yet. So the reason I know this is because we've measured it. We've measured electromagnetic activity, we've measured sound frequency, we even measured the decibels at which these frequencies come out of the walls. The history books claim that Southern Africa was sparsely populated. Well, unfortunately, that theory gets blown right out the water by the stone ruins and the ancient sites that we've been discovering and sharing with the world. There are many, many of them, and unfortunately they've been under attack, and there are millions, or let me rephrase it, thousands of them have been destroyed by ignorant government officials, forestry, farming, roadworks, town development. Thousands and thousands have been destroyed. However, there are many that remain. And unfortunately that they still fall into the realm of cattle kraal, so-called cattle enclosures that people used to keep their cattle in. And that is still what goes out in our history books. I'm going to show you just a few of them so you get an idea. If you've seen this before, please indulge me again. What's important to note that each one of them is circular, and yet each one is completely unique. There are no two stone circles that are identical or even closely resembling each other. They are completely unique. And you start seeing very interesting things as you start studying this. But because we only have an hour, I'm just going to rush through this. And you start seeing some fascinating flower-shaped patterns, because flowers are pretty. So they built cattle kraal to look like flowers. Right? But you can only see it when you're up in the air. I don't think so. So what's going on here? Notice how they connected by these channels, that everything is connected. And incidentally, Great Zimbabwe is part of all of this. Okay? It is not excluded. In fact, we'll realize that Great Zimbabwe is the head office or the major stone structure in Southern Africa. Or as I now have irrefutable evidence that we can't go to in here in this short space of time, that this was actually the Sumerian entity Enki, his domain. And thank you very much, Regina. And this is what Great Zimbabwe looks like from the side. If you haven't seen it before, it's a spectacular structure. It's a very confusing structure. The current historic evaluation is it was built by the Moors around 1,000 years ago. That's it. That's where it stops. I have news for them. The problem with these stone structures and these cattle kraal is that they aligned with the movement of the sun and solstices and equinoxes, and also sacred geometry and 5-factor and so forth. So, and hexagons suddenly come out of it, and you realize that these cattle kraal must have obviously been built for holy cows, because otherwise these guys were really wasting their time. And when you start seeing equilateral triangles that do some really interesting things, and star tetrahedrons coming out of these structures, we realize we're dealing with something far removed from basic structures, whether they were built for dwellings or cattle. It doesn't matter. This is a whole different level of consciousness. These ancient roads or channels that connect each one of these stone circles. Not one stone circle stands on its own. They are all interconnected. And this is where it really started getting my attention, when I realized that we're not dealing with individual dwellings or individual little structures for some little migrant tribes that were moving around. We're dealing with a vast network of structures that are interconnected by these channels that are not roads, as our history books in South Africa call them, roads to drive their cattle on. All of them are connected in one giant grid. Imagine most of Southern Africa looking something like this hundreds of thousands of years ago. What is it all about? You already know. Archaeological drawings from 1939 show us that there are no doors and entrances. And if there are no doors and entrances, and they're all connected, as you can see, like a bunch of grapes, sometimes singular walls and sometimes concentric walls. And now the plot thickens, and they're all connected. If they do not have doors and entrances, they cannot be dwellings. They have to be something else. And this is where it gets really exciting. Now we also get the real problem of agricultural terraces that cover more than 450,000 square kilometers in a part of the world that was apparently sparsely populated with hardly anybody living there. Who the hell was building the agricultural terraces, and who the hell were they feeding? And these terraces are everywhere. Once your eyes get sensitized and you drive around with me, it gets a little laborious because I keep stopping and taking photographs of everything like this here. But at least I can show you. Even on Google, when you start looking around, you'll start seeing these terraces everywhere. And on inhospitable steep mountains in Lesotho, where there shouldn't be any terraces, there are terraces. And here you have a beautiful example. This is right up the road from where I live. I live right in the middle of these ancient structures. I moved away 5 years ago from the craziness of Johannesburg. And you can see the channels, the terraces, and the stone circles all held together like a giant spider's web, holding them all together. And on top of the mountain, it looks something like this. It goes on from this particular point about 60 miles in a 360-degree circumference. So what's this activity all about? Once again, it's all about the goal, but you already know this. And what do ancient texts tell us? Ancient texts tell us that we are now discovering some interesting interference in human activity by these groups of beings called the Anunnaki. And I cannot stress enough, for those of you that are still speculating or wondering about this, I cannot stress enough the importance of the influence and the interference on human activity by these entities called the Anunnaki. And I urge you to go and do some more research on this, because we don't have time. How many of these ruins are there? If there were a few hundred or a few thousand, I'd say, you know what, I don't know. But unfortunately, that is not the case. In 1891, Theodore Bent theorized, or he guessed, that from horseback, that there were about 4,000 of these structures. You know, I can still deal with 4,000. But by 1974, Roger Summers did a count based on the technology and available information he had, and he came up with a really nice number of 20,000. By now, we're dealing with a vast vanished civilization already. But it doesn't stop there. It gets far freakier than that, people. Much freakier than that. I entered in 2007, and 6 months later, or 12 months later, I counted more than 10 million. No, I did not count one by one. I've had that question before. But I'm not going to go through the lengthy process that I took. What kind of stone is it? Let me just go back here, because more than 10 million, I hope this penny dropped for you, more than 10 million stone ruins. Clearly, there is something going on here that we got no idea about, that history has never recognized. A vanished civilization, we have no idea or clue about what they were doing. But now we do, and that's why we're here. And guess what? They had advanced knowledge of the laws of nature and sound as a source of energy, which I'm going to show you. And this is where my real breakthrough moment came, when I realized that the stone they used was a special kind of stone, mostly known as hornfels. They also use a very dense kind of dolerite, which to an untrained eye looks just like hornfels. But the common denominator they have is that these stones ring like bells. They conduct sound. As you can see, it's a black stone on the inside, and it's got this gray, this reddish brown skin that grows on the stone. That's referred to as patina.